This game was something you would just randomly think about once or twice a year for no reason whatsoever. You may recognize the two main devs, or at the very least, some of the games they have worked on. Juice Tin and Mike Sleva are the two main guys behind Raze and Strike Force Heroes. Siegius seems to be a bit of a side project of theirs. It takes place during Caesar's Gaelic conquest. Some details are a bit different from a historical standpoint. The Gaelic people are seen as the main aggressors, while in real life they were the ones being invaded. Magic exists and both commanding officers are willing to fight in the front lines with their magical powers. Pigs are a major faction in this conflict, and they manage to contract with the gods of this world. Versin, the Gaelic leader, is kind of seen as a generic dumb bad guy that plans a generic bad guy invasion of Rome, while the actual guy desperately tried to unite the Gaelic people to defend his homeland. Contrast a scene in the game where he sends out his men as meat shields versus him surrendering in real life to spare as many of his men as possible. Caesar, on the other hand, is portrayed as a fairly generic good guy. Anyway, enough about my surface level knowledge of Roman history. I really like the game's art style. All of the units are very well designed. I mean, the archers are just palette swaps of each other, but everything else is very distinct. I like how all of the Gaelic soldiers have mustaches and beards. Bodies slowly disappearing from the field and turning into bloody messes is a nice little detail. Most of the Romans are heavily armored, while chunks of the Gauls are shirtless. Gameplay-wise, the two main factions contrast each other very well. The Gauls are a bit better at offense and have a lot of strong singular units, while the Romans are a bit more focused on defense and have soldiers in much larger numbers. The basic Gaelic soldier is stronger than the basic Roman legionary, but legionaries come out in pairs by default. The vast technological advantage the Romans had over the Gauls seems to be represented by how much better their spells are. The Gauls get 2 niche defensive spells and a slightly useful ice puddle. The Romans get 3 damaging spells that were tailor-made to counter the Gauls. Gauls get Boar Riders, Maze Riders, and Behemoths, high attack and HP but are very slow and take extra damage from any range attack. Caesar gets Archers and Centurions, fast range units that come out quicker, cheaper, and in much larger groups. I guess the favoring makes sense. Caesar did canonically win. As a kid, I never noticed how linear this game was. There are very few moments where you just get to play with the troops you are given. The majority of the Roman campaign feels like a tutorial. New gimmicks are being constantly introduced mid-combat. This is by no means a bad way to show new stuff. It's just that only like 2 levels out of 25 are straightforward regular battles. Every other level has some sort of gimmick where I feel like I'm being pulled along and the actual fighting gets cut short. I don't think it's bad. It can be fine in its own right, but I do wish this game had like a free battle mode. EXP you get after each fight can be spent on unit upgrades, but you upgrade them by unlocking the ability to purchase stronger versions of your units. This Legion pair has 50% more health but costs 50% more gold. You can spawn 4 archers instead of 2 if you pay double the amount of gold. The upgrades even out powered gain with increased costs. Most of them feel more like side grades. I see why some people might like it, but I prefer regular progression. There are 25 total levels to play through. 10 Roman, 10 Gallic, and 5 Boar. Rome is easy mode, Gauls are hard mode, and Boars are silly mode. A good like 5 Roman levels are spent on tutorials, and the rest except level 8 are gimmick fights. The final level of the Roman campaign is set up for an everybody is here moment and basically plays itself as you get an extreme number of free troops. The Gallic campaign is a bit harder and spends less time with tutorializing new stuff, but most levels are still gimmicks. The final level of the Gallic campaign doesn't have all of the troops rally around Versin. Instead, Boars come to his aid, cause even though he just wanted to eat them, I guess they just like him better than Caesar. The Boar mini-campaign doesn't take itself seriously. Boars don't use gold, so everything is free. The Boar campaign starts with fights against the 2 other factions, but then you fight the devs of the game and those 2 decide to join up with the Boars. You fight with them for a bit, then Caesar and Versin decide to team up. You start losing before the devs realize that, hey, we're basically gods, and give you some hacks to win. This was a fun little extra thing. A little tangent on the music. It's all public stuff, mostly by a guy called Waterflame. You know, the guy that made Glorious Morning, the song that most people associate with Flash games. The game's good, but I do remember it being better. You don't really notice how most of the levels are linear and gimmicky as a kid, and some stages I remember as being a lot harder. These guys were fairly new at this. Like, this type of strategy game was completely different from what they have made before, and they were scrappy indie devs in the first place. Some jank will be here. It's also present in the next game as well, as they switched up genres again in Siegius Arena, a stage-based beat-em-up. I prefer the looks of the first game. I'm not artsy enough to explain it properly, but I feel like everyone is just a bit too skinny. Most of the armors don't come in sets, and plenty of them just look kind of off. I don't know, maybe I just have nostalgia for the art of the first game. After all, I only played this one recently. Setting-wise, you're a former commander of the Roman Legion and you were backstabbed and framed for a non-specific crime in a non-specific way. Forced into the arena, you have to fight your way through a ton of enemies to challenge the guy that betrayed you into a battle. Quick note, I would have liked it more if I was a captured Gallic fighter regaining their freedom. 3 weapon types, sword and shield, dual wielding and two-handers. It's easy to switch between them, but I would recommend two-handed. Also, this guy has spells and items. You won't use spells that much until late game, and the only items worth using are the potions. This game does have a bunch of smaller issues that add up, not to a point where I did not want to finish it, but there were many moments where I was like, I wish this was done a bit differently. We don't need to collect coins manually, and the low health red glow could be less aggressive. In combat, it feels laggy when you turn, and movement in general feels clunky. Combat itself is very simple. Light attack, heavy attack, and no combos whatsoever. Heavy attacks are bad. You spam one button throughout most of the game. Maybe it's because of recent games, but I feel like Siegius Arena really should have had a dodge roll. Doesn't this game kind of just look like there should be a dodge roll? A fairly unique mechanic is the crowd bar. It goes up when you hit people and goes down when you get hit. When maxed, you become the Flash for 7 seconds. If you know how to do it, you can combo one time slow into another. A higher crowd bar also means a higher score multiplier, but the score doesn't mean much because I think it's glitched. It stacks between stages when it shouldn't. There's a fame level that increases as you play. It doesn't do anything, but the higher your fame, the more people gather around you in the marketplace. It's a neat little detail. The original Siegius had a lot of gimmick levels. Well, this time around, almost all of the stages in Siegius Arena are generic, and this game has 43 stages. The enemy types get introduced early, and the stages after those are just like, here's a different looking enemy that has higher stats but behaves the exact same way, and have like 20 of them at once. I feel like I may have been a bit too harsh on the gimmick levels of the original Siegius. 43 stages of almost the exact same thing is quite tedious, especially when the later stages last as long as they do. Money balancing is also a little off. Early on, when most of the equipment hasn't been unlocked yet, you have too much money and nothing to spend on. Late game, inflation hits hard. You need to grind for like an hour for a singular armor piece, and you're broke most of the time. Thankfully, you don't need the endgame stuff to beat the game, and at least the bosses are cool when you can actually fight them. I feel like Siegius Arena suffers from similar issues to the original Siegius. There's a bunch of stuff that just feels kind of unpolished and dated. There's no big issues, just a bunch of small ones. Many Flash games did not have large enough teams to have something like dedicated playtesters, but I feel that if these games did, that would have done wonders for them. I see a good foundation, but the paint job is a bit off. There were plans for a Siegius 2 made for mobile, but it was cancelled because the devs did not like how the mobile market was looking. We just have some of the unit art and that's about it. Sky9 Games is still around. They released a remake of Strikeforce Heroes on Steam and seemed to have improved greatly as game devs. So maybe one day they can take another crack at Siegius. Alright, next is Age of War 2, Army of Ages, and some more.